So the Great Northern commissioned Ashwini Ramaswamy and Kavork Murad's Invisible Cities, and they've been working on this project for a couple years now. We are in partnership with Northrop as well as the Cole Center, and this project takes place at the Cole Center. That's where the world premiere will happen. And as you all know from reading the materials, the inspiration for this work was Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. And that book has been, very much a springboard for artists over time and an inspiration point. I'm really interested to hear how Ashwini and her co-leaders of this work have used the book to create this piece. For me, Invisible Cities has, I love how the book allows you to think about city building and creating a city of your dreams, thinking about a city of the future, city that you remember, or you can take it in so many different directions. So I can't wait to hear how the artists have interpreted this beautiful piece of literature. So I want to just say, give some biographic information on Ashwini and Will. So Ashwini has practiced South Indian classical dance, the form of Bharatanatyam, for more than 30 years, and she has toured worldwide as a choreographic associate with Ragamala Dance Company. And Will is the author of Everything Lost is Found Again and the very recent Farewell Transmission that you can buy tonight. His writing has appeared in the Atlantic, Pacific Standard, Afar, Foreign Affairs, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and many other publications. And Ashwini and Will are later joined by co-choreographers Barrett Algren, Alana Morris, and Joseph Tran, who are also leading this piece of work, and they will share their perspectives and inspiration. So I want to thank the Marbrook Foundation for its support of the work, and again, Majors and Quinn for hosting us tonight. All the festival information is on our website, thegreatnorthernfestival.com, and again, this piece will be premiering next Friday and Saturday night at the Cole Center, and tickets are on our website. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over now.
Can we try without the mics, or do you think? Yes?
Yeah.
Let us know if we're, usually I'm being shushed in public places, so if I'm not loud enough, you can tell me to go louder. All right, thanks to you all for coming out tonight. It's great to see everyone on a slick, slippery Minnesota night out here. And I'm very excited to get to talk with you about Invisible Cities. I think I started hearing about this project about a year ago, so I've been looking forward to this for a year, and I'm excited to get some of the inside details, the background story here, and I'm really excited to see the show next week. So I guess I'm assuming a lot of people know somewhat about the project, but maybe I thought we could start out with you talking a little bit kind of about some of the origins of this. But so there's, like, on the big scope of things, you've got 4 different dance styles. We've got visual art, live illustration, and it's all kind of rooted in this experimental Italian text from the 70s. So, like, there's a lot there.
Makes perfect sense.
There's like some big ideas going on there, and I'm just curious if there was like a specific origin behind all of this, or some moment where all these ideas started to coalesce. What the kind of history that started to bring all this together.
I'm gonna try not to take too much time on this because it kind of starts with the fact that I have been brought up in an artistic family, and my mother founded Ragamala Dance Company in '92. My sister is co-artistic director and executive artistic director now, and so from basically, I like to say, since I was a sentient being, we think of life through the lens of dance and art. So and my mom is voracious and almost sometimes a little bit too much. It's like everything is an inspiration, right? So everything that you come across, it can be a potentially something. So that's the undercurrent of all of this. And then in college, I was an English literature major, and I was most interested in postmodern literature. I just really love work and poetry and fiction that is multi-interpret, like you can interpret it in many, many ways. It's kind of weird, and you can come at it from different perspectives, and still it'll make sense to everyone in their own way. So that's kind of the background of that. I started really being interested in creating my own choreographic work in around 2013, just to see how my relationship with being born in the United States and then traveling back to India often informs my work. My mother was born and raised in India and came here in her 30s. My sister was born in India and came here as a toddler, and I was born here and went back with them. So we all have different relationships with home and our art and how we channel that in our work. So literature, not only as something that I've always been a voracious reader, but then studying it in college and always being interested in how literature kind of impacts us, has also been an undercurrent. So I hadn't actually read Invisible Cities until I started working on this project. It was a to-do list. And funnily enough, I have a very good friend who is a jewelry designer, and she made these. And she did a line on Invisible Cities, and each of the pieces of jewelry was named after a different city, and that happened in, I think, 2015 or 16. And I loved the title. I loved her description of why she was using it. And so then I started reading it. And I was really, really intrigued by Calvino's perspective. And when you read this book, you can pick it up and read it at any point and get something out of it. And it's so open to interpretation. It's so exciting in the way he uses language. It's so odd. I don't know sometimes if it's an uplifting book or a very depressing book, depending on your mood. And so with my interest in working with other dance forms on stage, I thought it was the perfect vehicle for different voices on stage coming together and expressing how they want to see this book, and therefore, and in a bigger way, how humanity kind of interacts with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had not read Invisible Cities before the preparation for this as well, and I'm assuming there's some folks out there who might not have, but the book itself is this conversation between Marco Polo and Kubla Khan, and the explorer is describing these 55 maybe real, maybe imaginary cities to, the emperor describing his empire to him. And they read more like dreams almost. They're, very strange, wild little vignettes. And I'm wondering if in there, when you're adapting this and being inspired into dance performance, are there specific scenes or cities that caught your interest? Were there moods or images? What kind of things did you bring from this book into the performance?
Well, first I brought the copy that I've been working on, and it's awful. But it's like this, and then there's printouts, and there's who knows what's in there, because it's been evolving over 4 years. First, I also need to mention the importance of the visual art element of Kavork, because that kind of ties this all together. In 2020, Kate and I were talking about this project and making it a reality, and I told her, when I read it, I so clearly see the cities. Mm-hmm. They've done it, he's written it in this way that your imagination just goes wild. And I said, I think we need a visual component. I just really see that. And she had worked with Kavork, or had known him in the past, and suggested it. And so that day I emailed him, and sometimes you email people, like they're never going to write back. That evening he wrote me back and he said, Calvino is one of my favorite authors. I've been inspired by Invisible Cities my whole career. All of my work kind of comes from those ideas. So it really felt meant to be that collaboration. Yeah. And so as I think you would do, Will mentioned, the framework of the book is this conversation between the two. The aging emperor and the explorer, and whether or not the explorer is telling the emperor the truth about what's happening in his empire is not known, and whether what is the colonizer doing out there are those empires even, does it even matter if he can't see them? Does he actually even own them? There's a lot of interesting questions there. And so when we first started, all of us we were working off of the cities themselves. I went through all of them and I said, okay, I think this city would be good for Joe. I think this city would be good for Alana. I think this might work. And I just kept hitting the wall of the descriptions are so beautiful, but we're not like getting the meat of anything yet. So Cowork and I talked and we decided that actually most of the pieces will be based on the conversations, not the cities. Because that's where all the really philosophical ideas are coming out. And that's when like the piece really started unfolding. So that was an interesting turn that only happened, I'd say, June.
Okay.
And so then everything started kind of coalescing around those ideas. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, well, speaking of Kavork, I'm intrigued. As dance, you're often collaborating with people, but I assume it's not usually with an entirely different art form. How did that kind of collaborate? How did you experience that? Was it I assume different from collaborating with dancers? And how did that kind of relationship unfold over the last year or so?
We're going to find out how it works in a week. But he's really collaborative. I mean, he's very available. I've worked with people in the past that are very difficult to have them respond to you, and you just have to kind of go with a feeling that you think they're going to like. He's very hands-on. We talk all the time. We're texting. He's texting me an hour ago, like, what's happening tomorrow. And so that's really good, and we're really committed to this as much as possible to it being a true collaboration, because I'm sending him videos, he's sending me visual ideas, so that they really go together and don't fight each other, because that's the fear, is that one is going to overpower the other. So hopefully with all these conversations, we've done residencies. We all went to Akron. The University of Ohio has a National Center for Choreography. In September, we had a week there. Then Kavork came here. We've all been in discussion with him. We have a Google Drive that everyone contributes to. And so it's been so far so good. And I think once we hit the ground next week, we'll really see how it works out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a fascinating combination. I'm excited to see it all play out. So back to the book for a second. There's a passage in there where it's describing when Marco Polo first is meeting Kublai Khan, and he doesn't speak the same language as him. And their first communication is Marco Polo is essentially communicating in gesture and with props. He's pulling props out of his bag and describing these cities through, and kind of like nonverbal. And you're left to decide whether Kublai Khan understands him or not, or whether he is communicating. And then as he spends more time in the empire, Marco Polo learns the language and then can speak, communicate verbally, but oftentimes reverts back to the gesture and the physicality of it. And so there's kind of this interesting idea about the limits of language and the advantages of physical communication and gestural communication. So I'm curious if that's anything you've encountered, what you think about the advantages of communicating through movement and gesture that language can't do, or that silences and nonverbal communication. What are the advantages and limitations in a project like this?
So, I mean, dancers, I can't speak for all dancers, but a lot of dancers will tell you, dance is the original form of communication. Our movement is. We don't actually need to talk so much, and we can really listen to our bodies and communicate in other ways. And I think this show is, I was saying to my mom today, it's an ode to dance. What everyone is doing, what everyone has created, if you are a dance lover at all, or even not, you will become one when you see, because this is spectrum of movement, and you really can see, I think, the motivations behind each choreographer and how they move and how they've decided to take up space or not take up space. And all those choices are very clear to me. It's nice not to be spoon-fed an explanation verbally. Just go with the feeling that washes over you. There's no lyrics in the show. There's Tamil or there's Indian lyrics, but you wouldn't know that. So, but I think that there's so much richness to nonverbal communication that obviously as a dance artist, I believe that for a long time, and there are program notes that will kind of guide you along, but it really is about writing the emotion and just seeing this rich, beautiful vocabulary unfold on stage.
Yeah. All right, I had two other questions for you, and then I thought maybe we'd loop in the other dancers as well. But so in memory is a theme throughout this whole book. There are so many passages that deal with memory, and it manifests in many different ways. You know, it's memory is a thing that sustains and nourishes. It's memory as deceptive and torturing. It's memory as a way to understand the present. There's all these different ways that memory is coming into the book, and I was curious what kind of role memory plays for you in your dance, whether it's in the preparation or inspiration or interpretation. How do you encounter memory in your work broadly or in this piece specifically?
It's more of a theme in my previous work, Let the Crows Come, which also features two of the choreographers. It's more of this idea of what you miss when you live in a country that you're not from. And you might not have ever had the memory, but it's there in you somewhere. And then you go back and you're kind of like, especially when you've been going for so long and you have these snippets of memories from a childhood in a place that you don't know if it really happened or not, or if it's something someone told you. So that's something I think that's very rich idea to put forth on stage. It's not a specific theme that I'm necessarily working with in this piece. I think maybe some of the other choreographers are. But I think innately practicing a form that is 2,000 years old, that's continually innovating into the present with one's family that you've been doing since you were a young child, like there's always memory involved.
Yeah. Actually, that kind of ties into the last thing I want to talk with you about. There's something interesting going on in the book so it's written in 1972. It's a relatively contemporary work, but it's kind of riffing on this 13th century, the tales of Marco Polo, that this Italian writer wrote back at sometime in the 1200s, relating the stories that Marco Polo apparently told him. So Calvino is taking this, very old story and modernizing it or seeing it playing around with it in a contemporary lens. And I was thinking about that with the dance involved here. Like your tradition Bharatanatyam is very ancient in, its history, and a lot of the other dance forms here are much more contemporary, whether it's, Gaga or breaking or modern. There's like an interesting friction between the old and the new, both in the book and I think probably in the dance. So I'm curious if that, what is this, how is this friction useful between the old and the new? How does it come into play here? And for the other dancers, you can address this as well when you want to come up later, or
It's I feel like what you're mentioning right now is like a microcosm of some of the weird issues I had growing up with being like the only Indian kid in class or something. Being the only Indian dancer growing up too, I always felt like it was so different than everybody else, and so are they gonna laugh at me? Do they think it's weird? And so this is kind of a way to be like, we're on stage with all these other forms, just as contemporary, just as innovative, When you see it lined up, I think people get a different sense. With Let the Crows Come, I got that feedback a lot. There was 3 of us doing forms that people thought of 2 of the forms as being contemporary and the other form as being ancient. But then when they unfolded on stage one by one, they saw so many commonalities in the people and in the way that the movement reflects a culture and a person, that it no longer became that. And so I feel by doing these kinds of works where everything is on stage together, but in their own way and interpreted in their own way, when you see that, it's also this microcosm of like, as humans, we have to share a space. And sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes it feels strange, but in the end, it's a beautiful thing. So that's kind of the big picture of the piece.
Yeah, those frictions always seem to lead profitable places, rather than kind of homogeneity. It's never very interesting. All right, so I don't know, should we involve the other, I don't know how we want to do this.
I think the chairs are just, coming.
Scoot some chairs up here.
Yep.
Over.
Yeah, you should do a little introduction.
Yes. So I don't know, maybe we'll just start with Barrett, and I guess, if you tell us all a little bit about your style and how you got involved in this project, and then I have some questions, kind of group questions.
Well, I just have to say one thing because you guys won't do it. They are all 3 of my favorite dancers, not only in the state, but in the country, in the world. And I just wanted to make a show where we were all dancing together. And they won't say how great they are, but they're just fabulous.
Thank you. I'm Barrett Algren. The form of dance that I practice and I teach is called Gaga, and it originated in Tel Aviv, Israel, and it's fairly contemporary. And it's less of a codified technique and more of a lens to approach movement and research of movement within the body. So it lends itself to how I choreograph as well. And I got involved in this project because I worked with Ashwini on her previous work, Let the Crows Come, that we premiered in 2019 with Liquid Music. And I think that's
Hi, I'm Joe. My art form is breaking, or breakdancing, which is, the stuff you see on head spins and air flares and flips. It's crazy stuff. It's a very young dance, started in 1973, so it's extremely contemporary. I started dancing in battles, competitions, at the club or whatever. And then most recently started choreographing for the stage in 2017. And that's another journey in itself to adapt a form that's so social onto the stage and so showy, but wanting to communicate something else. And I don't know, I can't remember how did you just
We presented at APAP a couple of years ago.
That's what that was, yeah.
I was like,
That's right. And yeah, when you had brought up Invisible Cities, I was reading it at the time. So I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's my thing.
What are we doing? Introducing ourselves?
I think so. And then,
Okay. I'm Alana Morris. I've lived here for 16 years in the import. These are also my favorite people in the world. And I have to say that because it contextualizes what I do. I'm a modern dancer in transition. What I love about Barrett is the sensuality and things coming from the inner place. What I love about Minnesota Joe is how he uses the form and he constructs the form. What I love about Ashwini is not only the competence, but also the richness and devotion to tradition, and then moving what are we gonna do with it? And so I think that that's also something I'm deeply engaged in my choreography. And what I do with dancers and what I pull out of myself is more, and from the inner, but also bringing in what is the political perspective that's taken for granted about my body, about our bodies. So I'm really in love with this project. I also am a bookworm. I did apply to work here when I first moved to the city. I was denied. I was telling that I think I still have a sore spot. I don't know why I wasn't qualified enough. And all my professional experience to that date was working in bookstores. I love to read, and I want to know why.
Now you're on stage. Now you're
So,
here
yeah.
on stage. Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm excited to see everyone working together next week. So one of the scenes from the book that I was thinking about earlier today, there's a conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan where he says something to the effect of, he's saying, like, no matter how wild these cities I'm describing, which have all these fantastical elements and parts, no matter how random or absurd what I'm saying, describing these cities, there's always some thread running through the city, some little kind of hidden piece of connective tissue. And in the book here, he says the cities are either bound by desire or its flip side, fear. And so I was thinking about this performance. There are these four relatively different forms and styles, and as my understanding is that sometimes they'll be kind of individually spotlit, sometimes we'll be performing together. So I was wondering how each of you see the little hidden thread running through the piece. What the kind of connective tissue, and maybe it's something apparent, or maybe it's something that is lurking back there that you've tapped into. Maybe you haven't even expressed it to the other people, but some little thread that you see running through this work as a whole. And we shouldn't feel the need to go in order necessarily. People can pick up on other comments. But yeah, I don't know. Should I put it to one of you first, or should I put Ashwini on the spot first?
I'm making noises in my mouth. I guess I would, in relation to the book and what he's actually saying, I think that common thread is like the actual people in the city and not like just a description of what it looks like. And so that's been something that I've kind of dug into more, is less the descriptive words, but like how the city affects the people that are actually living there. And so it's like, it's not only invisible cities, but like invisible people. Like we all put in, we're working so hard on this piece right now, and it's like, nobody will ever see that process. You know what I mean? And when I see everybody working hard, I'm like, damn, like I gotta step it up. I gotta fix something, I gotta fix that. So that's been the thing with me recently in connecting with this work, is just being in the room with everybody, and I guess I don't know if that relates to the book directly, but that's the motivating factor, is like the people that we're here, we're doing the work. So, and there's in an effort to like really tie it together, like there's a desire to like want to do something different. Like this is an ambitious project. Like it's crazy.
I question it every day.
Yeah. and so there's fear tied to that too, right? But like we're all risking something, and like I think those things are close together, and you can't have one without the other, really. So it's been a wild ride so far. So yeah.
I would say, to tag off of that, like very similarly, I'm feeling this level of excellence in the room, and like a committed, like a common language of excelling on this, and our commitment to the project and the finished product. And for some reason that feels like we all speak the same language, even though we're so very different in our styles and our backgrounds, and even in our like groups of dancers we're working with that can be very isolated throughout the work. But yeah, there's definitely like a similar language. I feel like I'm with my people every time I step into the studio. These are my people.
Can I piggyback?
Yeah.
you talked about, I heard relationship, and the way I heard you is exactly how I approach and my cohort approach to text. Because Ashwini is right, Kevork and Ashwini met, and they distilled, they pulled out something, right? And then we looked at it, and in my process, we've always looked at text and just said, what's coming up? What's coming up? We throw it out. And then we're here next to pleasure activism, pedagogy of the plus, something about class, some hip hop and other things we'll figure, right? And then this thing about Bach and things. And that's exactly what it is that I feel like I found in our sections, like whole worlds based on the relationship often, the conversation between the Kupla and the Marco. And so there has emerged a kind of personality, I feel, in Alana's group that is very unpleasant. Very unpleasant, but we're just going with it because it came up. You know, we are greedy many times. We take over space. We push people out. You know, we're these kinds of people. And it wasn't something that we came into the piece with. It's just something that sort of emerged organically that we're just saying yes to.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very interesting to share one space. Like, we're locked in a room, basically. There's nowhere else to go.
We're not locked. there is a lot.
But it's you know, we're creating some of the work still. You know, like things are kind of unfinished, and it's nice to see.
It's gonna be finished, Kate.
And it's nice to see similar. I mean, I don't know that we're taking from each other's aesthetics a little bit to tie the thing together. Like,
Well, I definitely think so.
yeah,
There's definitely, when you just start absorbing each other's energies, and I don't know, I love everybody who's involved. I mean, it's kind of a dream team.
yeah.
Um,
It's driving the work more than if we were isolated. Because then we would just come in and be like, okay, well, I got my thing, and then like, what's your thing? It's like, now I think we're all trying our best to make the work make sense, and like, that's, the pieces, Invisible Cities is not 4 different choreographers, you know, so,
we've been in talks for years now.
yeah.
I was looking at, I don't know what email, like 2020, Joe, like Barrett, you know.
But at the same time, having the freedom to be our own selves, right? Like, I think that's like huge. That's very important.
Yeah, as always, it seems like the friction between the different pieces is where the interesting stuff starts happening, you know. I have one more question, and then I don't know what our timing is like here. Maybe open to some audience questions. But one of the things as I was reading this book, because it's such a, you know, it's not narrative. It's just these scenes. There's no plot. There's not really any characterization. And as I read, I found my brain was kind of going between two different places. That you're like following storytelling and ideas to a certain extent. And then I would frequently find myself free associating and, you know, following one random connection to another. So it kind of feels like the book is very intentionally wanting to be involved in some amount of narrative and some amount of imagination. And I'm wondering, dance-wise, I assume there's an element in all of your dances where there's some element of storytelling happening. And then I assume there's also some element where you want the audience and the viewer to be non-narrative, to be involved in like away from words, to be involved in the realm of imagination and emotion. And so I'm curious for each of you, is there a spectrum somewhere between kind of storytelling, narrative, and imagination? Do you find your dance and your work closer to one or the other? Do you find yourself engaging with storytelling sometime and nonverbal stuff other times? How does that kind of come into different people's practices and work?
I'll start by just saying, one of the reasons the book is so attractive to me as a dance adaptation is again, as I said, the open-endedness of it. You can kind of do what you want with the text, and it still feels personal, it still feels tied to it. So our form, it comes from Hindu mythology, and spirituality is 100% a part of it. So we are channeling myth and stories from Hindu mythology and spirituality in a way that really, I think, is true to the section of the book that we've taken on, so that we don't have to divorce ourselves from our aesthetic and lineage and what we really want to stay true to in this. And I feel like there's definitely narrative elements in that, but not so much that you have to be following from A to Z.
Right.
It's very nonlinear, the book, so you can kind of really adapt your own perspectives.
I feel just personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of a genre, I don't ever divorce narrative. I don't think that that's my job to deliver you narrative. I think that we stay close to it, and the spirituality is just the way that I make work, so that you hopefully can just receive whatever you receive. But I don't think, for me, that won't happen if we're just doing a dance. So it's as deep in all the ways as possible. I'm very ambitious, and then I guess you get whatever you get, and then that is a conversation I love to have.
Yeah.
It's like, what was that? What did you experience? But because I know you're going to experience something because we're doing something. Yeah, not just feet 5, 6, kick, ball, change. Yeah. You know. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same thing with what me and my company, Breakfast, it's my dance company. When we make work on stage, we have a narrative with each other. We have like objectives, like this is what we want to feel, what we want to, and how do we deliver that message. And so there's like a lot of ushering happening in the choreography. Like we want you to notice this, but if you don't, then it is what it is. So yeah, I would say there's narrative within the process of the work, but I don't really work with like, Romeo Juliet type, type of stuff. Although I will be doing, I commissioned a piece.
But redefine narrative. Does it
Right.
always have to mean boy meets girl?
No,
boy
no,
kisses
I
girl?
was, no. There's,
What's
it's
your
not very
commission?
nonlinear. Say
What,
that.
the commission is a narrative?
Oh yeah, I was just promoting. Working with the Des Moines Orchestra on a Romeo and Juliet piece, which we're like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, so anyway, but yeah, the way we use narrative is with each other, and then it's very nonlinear in that way. But yeah, I would say that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I'm similar in that vein where I'm not telling a linear story of any kind. There's a lot of relationship to the other dancers. Some of the choreography I've built for this piece just came strictly from like language within a chapter, and so there's a moment that we do this gesture and it is a pistachio, and another gesture is poppy seeds, and another gesture came from camels swaying. And so it's like I'll pick visuals or characteristics of like a pistachio has like a hard shell. Poppy seeds relate to opium and like a wooziness. So it pulls out like energetic characteristics, and that's how then I build the materials from like a place of energy. But it might be elicited or like pulled from specific words or language.
And so Ronnie and Aparna and I created our section together, and there's a lot of layering of narrative. That's kind of something that in our creation process, it's nice to be able to have different reference points to kind of build a kind of richer work to draw from, especially because we have so much expression. And so the more you can put a context to that and feel the different states of being within that, the better.
All right. Well, what do you think? I don't want to monopolize the stage here any longer. Some questions from the crowd?
Yeah, I'm wondering how, so you speak of like, it seems like you guys are speaking a lot about different kind of emotional states and like, kind of like, connections, spiritual connections that you're channeling and, I don't know, maybe, or yeah, different kinds of devotion, different forms of experience. And then my question is kind of like in your process, how did you go about in doing the changes, going from one to another?
Usually, are you mean specifically like switching between dance forms, like?
No,
Or-
like if we're talking about like the narrative, you
Mm.
know, like, you know, you go from one emotional state to another. And I don't know, how do you just kind of like, as you're creating a piece, how do you kind of like decide how like the piece will evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all like very interconnected in that way. If you hit a wall, it's like, well, what does that feel like instead? Or you go back to the narrative. Like anytime, at least when I'm working, it's like, if you hit a wall, you just go to the next thing that you feel it's tied to. If that
Well,
makes sense.
There's a big kind of map of the show with every, from section 1 through section 10, every narrative element and passage that we're using for each person, the music link, the quotes, like there's a very intricate kind of map that has been constructed. And then I think from that, because there's so much imagery, and then if you are deciding to layer from another text, I think you're right. If you hit a wall of this doesn't feel right, or there's you can shift into another mode or another. Try this word or try this line, or we can try pulling in this storyline, and it somehow just eventually gels into a piece.
Yeah, and I want to say one thing is that this piece is also beautifully sonically made. It's a beautiful sonic environment. Crystal and Kay-Han are, I think, the two composers. There's another.
And then we have a South Indian song in
Who
there.
is their name? Okay, it doesn't have to leave. But yeah, right. So 3 composers. So there is a continuity in the sonic environment that I think helps string things along, and it's also superbly edited by Zach Rose, who happens to be Ashwini's husband, who's an amazing professional audio engineer. And so I think that helps bring continuity.
Well, it really helps with the emotional states.
Well,
The emotional states. Like the music is providing a lot.
I think you will love the music as well, the composition.
And Kavork.
Yeah, we have it. So there's a lot of.
There's work too, like the way it's going to be projected and how that kind of, I mean, that's like the fascia of the work in so many ways.
And he's put a lot, he's given a lot of feedback on how the projections should dictate what's happening on stage, even before we started staging. So we had that.
This is what I'm doing
Yeah.
there. You're going to have to be over here for that to read and work.
Did he separately create his whole?
We met, we had the residency, and then there's just been a lot of dialogue, but yes, basically, he's in New York, so.
And then I think also your question may speak to like the art and science of collaboration itself, because there's like this spiritual ethos in the room that we can't quite just pin down, which is when we get to a place and we're there and our partner says, well, why don't we do this? And Ashwini says, da 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 da, and then I go, and then Joe says, well, I got an idea. You know what I mean? And then things just start to work itself out, and I don't know why. I don't know why we're just not like, well, it could be anything. I don't know why we all have a sense that there should be some meaning, or there should be some logic, you know, and that we should sort of follow our own logic. I don't know why. I think it's just a magical thing.
I know I'm not supposed to be answering questions, but just being in the room, I actually think what is this beautiful connective tissue is that the intensity of each dancer in each cohort, each group, they are radiating this, if it's emotions of celebration or intensity or complete focus, this excellence that you talked about, it's like this power in the room, being in that studio, and then that power is like an echo, and it continues into the next section, and then they take it and they continue the next section, and oftentimes, I would say structurally, there's almost they don't have to connect. I mean, there's almost like a stop and then the next section, but it's that just intensity that is carried through the work and heightened, and it's like this ball that's growing, and that's how I feel being in that room. It's transportive. It's the reason why we do what we do. It's just to be in that moment, to watch the dancers feel what they're doing, like just embody, and feel something in your gut shift when you watch that. It's magical. It's beautiful, and across style and music and everything, it heightens the reason why dance is so important and is so beyond words.
Ashwini, it seems like you've landed on this really rich trajectory with your work that has expanded from what the Girls Come to now this, where you're working with these other dance languages and exploring the ways that they meld together and reflect upon each other. And I'm curious where it goes from here. Like, if you have an idea for what comes next, and if you're going to continue. I know that's a terrifying question. But like, I'm wondering if you have like a sense of like how that spirals out even further, or if you're still interested in continuing to explore this vein of project.
It's so interesting, because we were talking today. So when my mom founded Ragamala in the 90s, she was so enamored by many, many different forms. One of the reasons that Ragamala got a lot of fans is because she was collaborating with lots of different forms. But the basis for those collaborations were more just musical, or they didn't take years to craft. They were kind of more fun, or just what can we do? And it was an interesting way to get people to see Bharatanatyam in a different way. And then I would say 15 years ago or so, when Aparna came on as co-artistic director, she really channeled the company's focus into India and Indian arts, to Bharatanatyam, to like the depth of where our classical art forms come from. And that created a very rigorous practice where we all became kind of the best dancers we could be, and it brought the company to a new level. So when I say that when I started creating my own work, what would I do with it? I kind of took both, where the Bharatanatyam is at its core where it's supposed to be vocabulary-wise and aesthetically. It's our lineage that we protected and honed, alongside other forms that I feel have the same desire for rigor and excellence, and to put them on a stage together so that people can see that kind of excellence on stage together in conversation, and kind of put their own connecting points into it. Invisible Cities being just the vehicle to show all of that. I am absolutely no idea what's next, because this is still, not coming up yet. It will tour for several years, I think, and each time it mounts will be a new Herculean task. But I will be going into more Ragamala pieces created with Ronnie and Aparna. We'll be creating our first show together next. So I'm really excited to kind of go in that direction and continue. Let the Girls Come is still touring. Invisible Cities will be touring. We'll be touring several works with Ragamala. So for right now, I feel like it's enough. But we'll see.
So we'll never see you again.
Yes.
Excuse me, I love the way you've presented everybody and given everybody a way to focus, and that's admirable. I'm wondering, since you've all mentioned storybooks or maps, and Barrett even gave us some images that inspired her movement, if we might hear from each of you what particular movement idea we'll see that's in your map or the narrative that we won't get to see, that would help us understand what you're actually doing.
So our section is the only section in the piece that is a city. Everything else is from the conversations. And the city is basically talking about celestial architects and how they have mapped out this perfect city. But of course, there's no such thing as a perfect anything. And so with the idea of the celestial universe creation in mind, we are using the creation myth of Brahma, the creator, who, when he creates the universe, realizes that what he has created is a state of chaos. There's no meaning to anything. So in order to create meaning, from his mouth he creates the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, and she brings order to the chaos. She gives seasons, she gives nature, she tames the oceans into rivers. And so we are kind of channeling the goddess and showing the feminine power to create order within chaos. That's what we've mined out of that city. So that's what you'll see from us.
We have, in Alana's cohort, we have movement ideas that come as motifs. There's a lot of, we've looked at, I call it the moving coordinates. We looked at an architect or astronomer, someone who plans and everything is in the perfect alignment, perfectly measured science. And so you'll see a lot of precision, and then you'll see this kind of gregarious, very generous, smothering, big, washy kind of movement. We also have a lot of states of being, little flirtation that might lean itself to someone who is just thinks that they are above everything. So there's a lot of characterization in the movement vocabulary for Alana's cohort. You'll see extreme devotion, not very different from this kind of, like the sacrificial kind of devotion that gets spread up on the news where people like take potions and they die. I'm telling you, we're really dark people in a lot of cohorts. So,
things that I have a solo in the piece. It's largely based on my dad. He's Vietnamese, immigrated here, and my youngest brother is 3, so he's got to support, and I have a family of 10, so I don't. He has a family, and he's just constantly working, nonstop, never takes a break ever, and so that the solo and then the other section with my other dancers is kind of based on like that. You know, the people that just grind all the time and maybe a thankless job. I was in the studio last night after finishing rehearsal in the morning. I didn't want to be there, but I was like, well, someone's working overtime right now and they're not, you know, they're doing it. My dad's probably at work right now, like, so if he can commit to that, I can commit to breakdancing, you know? So it's largely that's been my inspiration for this work, is just, so, and my dad works with his hands. He's a, what do you call it? He makes circuit boards and he's like microscopic in what he does. And so like I use a lot of hands in my work lately. So yeah, that's kind of inspiration.
In Barrett's cohort, I have the privilege of working with 4 other women, and they're all dancers I've worked with in the past who I admire greatly, and I have a a beautiful range of quality in their movement and how they ingest and digest material. And I think the through line for all 5 of us, depending on the section, is like the range of quality that we can move in, whether it's like very sharp and articulate or supple, adagio, slow, and then leaving all of us the opportunity to have our own personality with it, so that I'm not cleaning it and perfecting it in some sort of like we all have to do this exactly the same, but allowing for each one to take their own ownership artistically. And so I think that that's, depending on the different sections that we've built based on different chapters and language, that's a very large component for how I've built those sections of those dancers.
So I've read the book probably like 10 years ago. I found, I think like a lot of people do, that it's kind of haunting and that it sort of reverberates out into your life and you kind of keep returning to it. So I'm wondering, as creators, not just thinking about that quality in the original like Italo Calvino's work, but in this work that you guys have created collaboratively, I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's also going to be kind of haunting or have aspects of it that reverberate. What do you think you will carry with you from this creative process? Or if it's easier, what do you think an audience member might carry with them?
Definitely haunting section.
That music does not turn off. Like when there's a section we work on, and I'm like, it is nonstop playing. It's definitely haunting. I'm like, oh. I don't know. I don't think I've ever collaborated in this way with other performers. Like, my company is a collaborative in that we're all the choreographers in Breakfast, and so we have to negotiate like everything, like every tiny thing. But I've never done it with other forms that I'm not familiar with, and it's exciting. It's when you get down to it, we all expect a lot from ourselves and like really strive for great things, and I mean that's all you need, like being collaborate with somebody, even if it's a form that's so different. So I don't know. I think I'm excited to walk away with the spirit of just being more open to what other people have to say and what their interpretations are, and like how it rubs up against mine, and if it works, and if it doesn't, that's fine too. I don't know. It's just that spirit of relationship and collaboration is what I'll walk away with.
There's so many challenges, and every time there's a challenge, it's so gratifying to be back in the studio and be like, this is why. Think of what you're saying, and I feel like the books, when it's haunting, when it's hopeful, when it's whatever you want it to be, I think that just the mode of creating just reminds me of reading the book. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it has that quality of like, it's frustrating, it's euphoric, I feel amazing, I feel, and then you go home and you go to sleep.
And do it again.
I feel like I've gained gladness, joy, because I've been in other collaborative processes that really were not so collaborative, where you feel like you're pulling artists and they're asking you questions about what do I do? And I'm like, that's a great question. Let's explore that question. But they really want me to tell them what exactly to do. And I'm like, oh, that's a complete different paradigm than I want to work with. So with this, it's just like Ashwini says, and growing up as a bookworm, I see everything so cinematically and I experience everything so sensually and so passionately. And so when I read the thing, I'm like, oh yes, it gives me a sense of this. And so, and like I get to explore that with my people because, as Barrett says, they're the best people. They're so amazing people, and they're so capable. And Barrett and I actually share 2 dancers. So yeah, I feel like it's such a pleasure to be like, I get to do me and explore me, and then like everyone's like, And you're like, oh, this is great. And then, because that's really the world that I think that's the world that we should all live in. This cooperative. And it doesn't mean it's always like kumbaya. Like there are like, well, I don't think so, but that's not bad. Like having a different point of view is not a bad thing. We shouldn't shy away from it. We're just having a conversation.
I'm really excited to tour this piece, like knowing that this is not 2 days of performing and then that's it. I think we put in so much work and it's such an epic production that if that was the case, it'd be really sad. So and I think anytime I like come back to work, even if it's like a year later, I've changed so much and I can bring more to it, and it's like lived in me, whether it's just dormant for a year. And so I'm really excited to see where this piece goes.
It will evolve. It just will.
Yeah.
Especially our relationship with, now we can experience the projections for real, and like our relationship with work will be deeper. It'll just get better. And I hope people can walk away with the show with a sense of like what if, I guess, or wonderment. Like, it is up to us to make the show. Like, it's not just gonna be like, well, are you okay with that? Like, you know what I mean? It's like we are making the work, and so it's like it's up to everybody to make something work. So yeah.
Can I end with one thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say,
Yeah.
which is, I think I was asked a question for an audience engagement thing. What's a quote that you like? And I told them this Toni Morrison quote where I'm totally paraphrasing. She says, write the book you want to read, basically. And that's what this is. This is the show I want to see. These are the people I want to see dancing. These are the people I want to dance with. This is the art I want projected. And so hopefully you all like it.
Thank you all for coming out and telling us about the show. I couldn't be more excited to see it all come together. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for pulling this all together.
Tell us where it is and when.
Oh.
Cole Center, Friday, January 27th, Saturday, January 28th, 7:30 p.m. Tell your friends outside of Minneapolis. There's also a live stream. Both days.
But everyone in Minnesota has to come to for outside.